They said it was just another winter storm in the mountains of Silver Creek. But when a deputy stumbled across a half-buried canine, weak, scarred, and heavy with unborn pups, she knew this was no ordinary rescue. What the snow was hiding went far beyond one dog's survival, because as the night deepened, the shepherd began to lead her toward a secret buried in the woods, a secret powerful enough to shake an entire town and prove that some guardians don't always wear badges or carry guns, but come with loyalty and paws. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel to watch the next stories by clicking the subscribe button right below this video. Thank you, amen. The mountains around Silver Creek, Montana, had a way of swallowing people whole when the storms came down from the north. On nights like this, it felt as though the entire world had shrunk to a cage of ice, every breath freezing before it reached the lungs. The wind came shrieking over the ridgelines, whipping through the ponderosa pines with the fury of an ancient predator, and the snow fell so heavy it buried fences, swallowed barns, and made even the town's main street vanish in a curtain of white. To live in Silver Creek was to live at the mercy of winter, and winter was merciless. Deputy Claire Sheridan guided her patrol truck slowly along the mountain service road, tires wrapped in chains that clinked against the frozen surface. She was 34 years old, tall and lean, her body sharpened by years of law enforcement duty and by a discipline that she had forced upon herself since the day her brother died. Her face carried the strength of someone who had seen too much too young, with a sharp jawline and pale skin touched red by the biting wind. Her eyes were a clear, stormy gray, and people often said that when she stared too long, it felt as if she were reading the truth you didn't want anyone to see. Dark auburn hair, usually tied back, was tonight braided tightly under her standard-issue winter patrol hat. She wore the navy blue uniform of the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department, layered under a heavy parka, the silver badge glinting whenever the headlights swept over the windshield. Claire wasn't patrolling out of obligation. She could have stayed at the small substation in town, kept warm by coffee and the old propane stove, answering radio calls from her desk. But solitude gnawed at her, and the silence inside buildings pressed too heavy on her chest. Out here, in the punishing storm, she felt a strange clarity. She had lived with guilt since the day her older brother, Michael Sheridan, had been killed in an explosion tied to a gun-running operation 3 years earlier. Michael had been the Golden One, confident, brave, the kind of man people trusted instinctively. Claire, though younger and quieter, had idolized him. Losing him had left a wound no snowfall could ever cover. She had thrown herself into her work since then, patrolling the forgotten roads, checking trailheads, making sure hunters or travelers hadn't been caught in the mountain's wrath. If she could save someone else from being lost, maybe she could silence the echo of her brother's voice in her head, the voice that always said she hadn't been there when it mattered. Her radio crackled faintly with static, dispatch repeating for the third time. Blizzard warning extended. All non-essential travel prohibited. Road closures on High Lantern Pass and Creekside Ridge. Officers advised to use caution. Claire reached down, lowered the volume, and muttered under her breath, "Doesn't change what's out here." The storm lashed against the windshield, snowflakes like shards of glass under the headlights. The road ahead curved sharply along a steep drop, a place locals called Widow's Bend. Claire slowed, her hands steady on the wheel, every sense taut. That was when she heard it. At first it was nothing more than the storm's cacophony, the endless groan of trees, the screaming gale, the crunch of shifting drifts. But then came another sound, thin, high, and broken, a whimper carried on the wind, too deliberate to be mistaken for timber or coyote. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She braked, the chains clattering against ice, and killed the engine. The silence was sudden, crushing, the kind of silence that pressed on the eardrums until the only sound was her own heartbeat. She cracked open the driver's door, and the storm shoved its way inside, searing her skin with icy needles. Snow swallowed her boots instantly as she stepped down. She lifted her flashlight, its beam cutting thin tunnels through the white chaos. For a moment there was nothing, only the scream of wind. Then it came again, a fractured cry, somewhere between a whine and a broken bark. Claire followed the sound down the slope beside the road, her boots sinking shin-deep. She slid once, caught herself against a branch, then pushed onward until her beam caught something that didn't belong. A dark mound lay half buried in the snow, trembling faintly. Claire's breath caught. It was a dog. She dropped to her knees, brushing snow away with gloved hands. The shape revealed itself slowly. A German shepherd, large and muscular despite the gauntness of her frame. Her coat, once a rich black and tan, was matted with ice and streaked with blood. Her sides heaved in shallow, uneven breaths. Her belly, swollen and distended, made Claire freeze for a second. Pregnant. The dog was carrying lives inside her, even as her own flickered like a candle guttering in the storm. Claire's flashlight swept across her body, and what it revealed twisted something deep in her chest. Rope burns scarred the dog's neck, raw indentations cutting through the fur. Her ears, one half torn, flicked weakly at the light. Her eyes opened, a pair of amber orbs dulled with exhaustion but still carrying a depth that spoke of memory and pain. They locked on Claire's face, not with panic, but with a silent plea. The dog had no strength left to fight. Claire whispered, her voice steady despite the storm clawing at her throat. "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." She slipped off her scarf, dipped it into snow, and wiped gently around the dog's eyes, clearing the frost. The dog blinked slowly, her breath rattling, her body quivering with exhaustion. Claire reached to check her paws and saw the hooves of desperation in another form. Nails cracked, pads torn, legs stiff as if she had run until she couldn't anymore. This wasn't an accident. This dog hadn't simply gotten lost in the storm. She had been hunted, driven, discarded. For a moment, Claire knelt there, the storm raging around them, and felt the old familiar ache rise in her chest. The same ache she had felt standing in front of Michael's grave, the same helplessness. But this time she refused to turn away. She clenched her jaw and scanned the slope. Her truck waited above, just a dim shape behind the curtain of white. "You're not dying out here, not tonight," she murmured, almost to herself as much as to the dog. It took everything she had to slide her arms under the animal, hoisting her partway before the weight forced Claire to adjust. The shepherd whimpered weakly, her body limp in Claire's grip, but she didn't resist. Claire staggered up the incline step by step, her boots slipping, snow soaking through her gloves. Her breath tore from her lungs in ragged gasps, but still she pressed on, half dragging, half lifting, until finally she reached the truck bed. She spread a thick blanket and eased the dog onto it, pulling another over her shivering form. Inside the cab, Claire cranked the heater to full blast. She twisted in her seat, glancing through the rear window. The shepherd lay curled, sides heaving. Her ears twitched faintly at the sound of Claire's voice. "You made it," Claire whispered. She hesitated, then added softly, "Raven." The name slipped into the air almost without thought. It fit, the dog's dark coat, the sharpness of her eyes, the aura of survival even in the face of ruin. Raven, a survivor born from storm and shadow. As the truck rumbled back onto the road, Claire tightened her grip on the wheel. Her goal was no longer just to finish patrol. She had a life, or several lives depending on her now, and she would not fail them. The blizzard roared on, but in the cab of the truck, Claire Sheridan had found a purpose stronger than the storm. The storm outside had quieted by dawn, but Silver Creek still lay buried beneath a suffocating quilt of snow, its rooftops sagging under the weight, the frozen river muted like glass beneath sheets of ice. The town, small and sturdy, was used to hardship, but even its oldest residents admitted the blizzard had been one of the worst in decades. Within the ranger's substation that doubled as an emergency rescue hut, Deputy Claire Sheridan moved like a figure caught between two worlds, the world outside where the storm dictated survival, and the world inside where her choices now carried the weight of life and death for the fragile creature lying on a spread of blankets. The German shepherd she had pulled from the snow the night before lay on her side near the wood stove, the air around her faintly misted with heat. She was no ordinary stray. Up close, Claire could see she bore the disciplined musculature of a trained canine. Her shoulders broad and defined, the once powerful frame now scarred and worn thin from neglect. The dog's swollen belly made her movements labored, every breath rattling faintly as though weighed down by exhaustion. The frost had melted from her coat, revealing patches of fur rubbed raw where rope had once bitten into her flesh. Claire crouched beside her, holding a tin cup of water. "Come on, Raven," she whispered, trying the name again. The shepherd's amber eyes flicked open, dulled but aware, the gaze of something that had survived cruelty and yet refused to fully surrender. Slowly, Raven's tongue darted to the rim of the cup, lapping weakly. Relief threaded through Claire's chest, though she didn't let her shoulders relax. Survival was never guaranteed, not for Raven, not for the unborn pups, not for anyone who had been left for dead. She had radioed for veterinary assistance at first light, though she knew it could take hours for anyone to reach the cabin roads. Until then, she would do what she could. And Claire Sheridan was nothing if not stubborn. Her eyes lingered on Raven's scars. They weren't random. The burns across her neck spoke of industrial rope, the kind used by handlers to restrain trained dogs. A jagged notch on her ear, the kind that came not from wilderness, but from repeated combat or a hard life spent in forced service. This wasn't the story of a lost pet. This was the story of a soldier abandoned. Claire's stomach twisted with recognition. She pulled open the old metal cabinet against the wall and dug through files that had been left there by previous deputies. It took her minutes, but she found what she half expected. Reports filed by the state task force 2 months earlier about missing K9s. A unit had been ambushed during a raid connected to weapons trafficking near the Idaho border. Several officers injured, 1 killed, 2 dogs missing, both German shepherds. The reports had grown cold when leads evaporated. Her gloved fingers tightened on the page. Raven wasn't a stray. She was one of them. A memory pressed into her mind like frostbite. Her brother Michael standing in front of their family ranch house, laughing as he tugged the leash of his own canine partner, a Belgian Malinois named Rook. Michael had been tall, broad-shouldered, with a confidence that drew people to him. He had been 6 years older than Claire, more like a guardian than a sibling, the one who convinced her to join the force when she doubted herself. She had worshipped him, and he had died 3 years ago when a storage unit on the outskirts of Billings exploded during a raid, an explosion traced back to the very same network of arms smugglers whose shadow seemed to snake across Raven's body now. The ache was sharp, even now. Claire remembered holding the folded flag at his funeral, her parents' hands trembling, the silence of the procession broken only by the whine of Rook, who had survived but would never work again. That day had carved something cold and merciless into Claire. It had driven her into the badge, not out of duty, but out of hunger for justice, for answers, maybe for revenge she dared not name aloud. She shut the file slowly, her gray eyes lingering on Raven. "They left you behind," she murmured, "just like they left him." The words were bitter but laced with something gentler, too recognition, perhaps, of 2 beings tied by wounds deeper than flesh. The creak of the outer door broke her thoughts. Cold air swept inside as a figure pushed in, brushing snow from her coat. Dr. Naomi Fletcher, the town's only veterinarian, stepped into the warmth with the efficiency of someone who had been summoned countless times to emergencies. Naomi was in her late 40s, a slender woman with narrow shoulders and a lined face that carried both compassion and fatigue. Her dark blonde hair, streaked with silver, was tied back in a practical knot, and wire-rimmed glasses slid down the bridge of her nose as she set her medical bag on the table. Her hands, long-fingered and steady, spoke of years spent coaxing frightened creatures back from the brink. "Where is she?" Naomi asked without preamble. Claire motioned to the blanket. "By the stove." Naomi knelt, her movements calm, her eyes sharp. She pressed her stethoscope to Raven's chest, listening for long moments, then palpated her swollen belly gently. Raven flinched but didn't resist. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, infection in the hind leg, but it hasn't spread too deep yet. She's carrying pups 3, maybe 4. Naomi's voice was brisk but laced with quiet reassurance. "She's tough. Tougher than most I've seen in this condition." Claire exhaled slowly. "She's not a stray. She's one of the missing K9s from that raid." Naomi's eyes flicked up, the glass lenses catching firelight. She didn't look surprised. "I thought so. She holds herself differently, not wild, not pet, military trained." Her hand stroked Raven's head briefly. "The question is, who hurt her, and why was she left to die?" The answer hung between them like a storm cloud. Claire had no words. She only knew that the scars on Raven's body looked like the same invisible scars she carried inside. For hours they worked in tandem. Naomi administered fluids with an IV, cleaned Raven's wounds, and stitched a tear along her flank. Claire fetched supplies, held the shepherd's head steady, murmured encouragement whenever her eyes flickered with fear. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but inside the cabin, the world narrowed to the rhythm of breath, the slow drip of saline, the stubborn fight of survival. At one point, Naomi glanced sideways at Claire. "You're running yourself thin," she said simply. Claire's jaw tightened. "Not as thin as her." Naomi didn't press further, but her look was knowing. People in Silver Creek all knew the Sheridan family's story. They knew Claire's relentless patrols weren't just about law and order. They were about ghosts she couldn't put to rest. By late afternoon, Raven's breathing had steadied, her eyes clearer though still clouded with fatigue. She shifted slightly, her muzzle pressing against Claire's boot in a gesture that felt almost deliberate. Claire froze, then bent down, brushing her hand over the shepherd's head. "You're still here," she whispered. Something in that moment broke open inside her, the wall she'd built since Michael's death, the vow that she wouldn't let herself feel attachment again, not to another partner, not to another K9. And yet here it was, happening without permission. Naomi packed up her kit, her voice quieter now. "She'll need rest, food, care, but she'll make it. But—" She paused, studying both of them. "It looks like she's already chosen you." Claire didn't reply, but she didn't pull her hand away either. As night fell, the blizzard outside stilled into a ghostly calm. The pines stood heavy with snow, the sky a pale smear of moonlight. Inside the cabin, Claire sat in the chair near the stove, Raven curled within arm's reach. The warmth settled around them, but sleep did not come. Instead came memories, the explosion, the folded flag, Michael's laughter, and the quiet realization that the battle she thought she had lost might not be finished. Raven stirred, her paws twitching in dream. Claire whispered into the silence, "We'll find out who did this to you. I promise." It was a vow to the dog, but also to herself, to her brother, to the ghosts that still clung to her. The scars of the past did not fade in the snow. They surfaced, demanding reckoning, and Claire Sheridan knew she was not done reckoning yet. By the second night in the substation, the storm had weakened into a fitful wind that whispered through the pines rather than screamed. Snow lay piled high against the cabin walls, glittering faintly under the pale light of the moon. Inside, the wood stove crackled, the air heavy with the smell of pine smoke and antiseptic. Raven lay on the blankets, her flanks still swollen but moving in steady rhythm, her eyes half closed. Claire had drifted in and out of restless sleep in the chair beside her, her mind divided between the dog and the ghosts that refused to release her. It was near dawn when Raven stirred sharply, her body tensing. Claire blinked awake just in time to see the shepherd shift awkwardly, her body convulsing with a sudden contraction. Claire's chest tightened, panic and determination mingling. She knelt beside Raven, whispering reassurance. Hours stretched long, but at last, with trembling strength, Raven delivered two pups, tiny, blind, their fur slick and bodies trembling against the cold air. One was darker, nearly black with faint tan streaks. The other lighter, gray with a dusting of cream. Claire wrapped them quickly in cloths she had warmed by the stove, placing them close to their mother's belly. Raven nuzzled them weakly, her breath raspy, but there was no mistaking the instinct in her movements. Claire's throat thickened with emotion. She had witnessed enough endings in her life. Tonight she had seen something begin. She sat back against the chair, exhaustion pulling at her bones, but relief flowing through her veins. She expected Raven to collapse into rest, but after only an hour, the shepherd began to grow restless. Despite her weakened body, Raven pushed against the blankets, struggling to her feet. Claire moved quickly, trying to calm her. "Easy, girl. You've just given birth. You need to stay put." But Raven wasn't listening. Her amber eyes darted to the door, her ears twitching at some sound Claire couldn't hear. Then she turned her muzzle toward Claire, tugging gently at the cuff of her sleeve with surprising insistence. Claire frowned. "Not now," she whispered. But the pull in Raven's posture was undeniable. There was something out there, something she wanted Claire to see. Claire hesitated, then glanced at the pups. She couldn't risk leaving them unattended, not in the fragile hours after birth. She bundled them in cloth and slid them carefully into a small crate padded with hay from the station's supplies, placing it close to the stove's warmth. She left the door to the room ajar so she could still hear them. Then she clipped a rope loosely to Raven's collar. Not a leash, not force, just guidance. And together they stepped into the snow. The air outside bit at her skin. The forest lay silent beneath its burden of white, every branch heavy, every shadow long. The storm had left drifts waist-deep, but Raven moved with purpose, her paws breaking through the crust as though she carried a memory etched deeper than exhaustion. Claire followed, the rope slack, her flashlight beam carving fragile tunnels in the darkness. They trekked for nearly an hour, winding through pines that creaked under the weight of ice. Claire's breath formed white plumes in the air, her legs burning from the effort of wading through snow. Several times she thought of turning back, but Raven's resolve was unshakable. Every so often the shepherd paused, sniffed the air, then pushed onward. At last, Raven halted at a clearing where the ground dipped into a shallow hollow. Claire swept her flashlight across the scene, and her breath caught. Against the snow stood the rusted skeleton of a cage, its bars twisted, the metal corroded with time and exposure. Rope hung from one corner, frayed and stiff, stained dark with what could only be dried blood. Around the edges of the hollow lay scattered fragments, splintered wood, broken collars, scraps of chain. Claire crouched, brushing snow aside with gloved hands, revealing deep grooves in the frozen earth. They weren't natural. They were the marks of animals clawing desperately, trying to escape. Her stomach knotted. This wasn't just where Raven had fallen. This was where she had been held. The hollow was silent, but the air carried the stale stench of something older, metallic and rancid, that even the storm hadn't washed away. Claire lifted a fragment of collar, its tag scratched out. She felt the weight of what she was holding, evidence of cruelty hidden beneath snow. Raven stood beside her, body tense, ears flat. She gave a low, mournful sound, a sound not of fear but of recognition. Claire rose slowly, her flashlight catching another detail, paw prints scattered at the clearing's edge, half filled with new snow but distinct enough to suggest a herd. Multiple dogs had been here, not just Raven. Some prints led into the woods, vanishing in the darkness. She whispered, "There were more of you." Her radio crackled faintly, breaking the silence. She pulled it free, hesitating before pressing the call switch. She needed to report this, but instinct told her to be careful. There were people in Silver Creek who still whispered about deputies gone missing, about evidence that never made it to court, and her brother's case buried under the weight of bureaucracy loomed large in her mind. As she stood there, she thought she saw movement at the tree line, a shadow slipping back among the pines. She swung the flashlight, but nothing remained. Her pulse quickened. Were they being watched? Or was the forest simply playing tricks after too many sleepless nights? She turned back to Raven. "We'll come back with help. We'll find out who did this." Raven met her gaze, amber eyes burning with something between pain and command, as though urging her not to stop. They retraced their steps through the snow, the forest pressing close, the silence oppressive. Claire's thoughts churned. She had come into the storm seeking to save a single life. Now she had stumbled into something far larger, a network, perhaps, that reached back to the same shadows that had claimed her brother. Back at the cabin, the pups stirred softly in their crate, their whimpers filling the air. Claire knelt beside them, letting Raven curl protectively around their small bodies. For a moment, the world felt fragile, but whole. Then she rose, her eyes hardening. She wasn't just saving Raven anymore, she was chasing the truth. The sky over Silver Creek turned a dull pewter by late afternoon, the kind of color that swallowed light and left the mountains shrouded in a permanent half-dusk. Claire Sheridan had returned to the hollow with Raven at her side, her boots crunching over frozen earth and snow as she methodically documented what she had found the night before. She crouched, camera in hand, capturing close-ups of the twisted cage bars, the strands of frayed rope, and the black stains that marred the snow even after the storm. Every click of the shutter was another nail in a coffin she hoped to build for the people who had done this. Evidence mattered, and she had learned the hard way how easily justice could evaporate without it. Raven stood a few feet away, tense and alert, her ears swiveling constantly. Though still gaunt and recovering from giving birth, the shepherd seemed unwilling to relax in this place. Her fur bristled every time the wind shifted, her nose lifting to scent something Claire couldn't detect. Claire paused between photos to stroke her head gently. "We'll get them, girl. Whoever did this, they won't get away." She crouched again, angling for another shot of the grooves carved into the ground, when the low rumble of an engine cut through the stillness. Claire froze, her hand tightening on the camera. Engines had no business this deep into the woods, not on a service road half buried in snow, not here. She snapped her head toward the tree line just as a black truck emerged slowly from behind the pines, its tires spitting slush, headlights cutting harsh beams across the clearing. No license plates. Her pulse quickened. She shoved the camera into her coat and reached instinctively for her sidearm. The truck rolled to a stop yards away, the engine idling with a guttural growl. The driver's door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall and broad with a heavy gait that spoke of confidence bordering on arrogance. His coat was black canvas, dusted with snow, hood drawn low. As he came closer, Claire took in his face, angular, rough-hewn, with narrow eyes that glinted with hostility. A dark scar ran across his jawline, and a thick beard peppered with gray did nothing to soften the menace in his expression. This was Jonah Pike. Claire knew his name from whispers in the sheriff's office, and from Michael's old notes. He had been Boone's right hand for years. Mid-40s, ex-con with a record of violence buried under stacks of dismissed charges. Everyone in Ravalli County knew Jonah had walked free too many times because Boone had money and influence. Claire had never seen him up close until now, but the moment she did, she felt the weight of his reputation. Dangerous, loyal only to Boone, and without hesitation when it came to violence. "Well, well," Jonah drawled, his voice gravelly, carrying across the snow. "Looks like we got ourselves a nosy deputy who wandered a bit too far." His eyes slid past Claire to Raven, narrowing. "And look at that! Thought we lost you in the storm, sweetheart." Claire's jaw tightened. She raised her weapon slightly, steady and firm. "Hands where I can see them, Pike. You're trespassing on county land." Jonah smirked, spreading his gloved hands as if mocking compliance. "Trespassing? That's cute. You think this is your land? You think the badge on your chest means anything out here?" He stepped closer, boots crunching heavily. Raven snarled, lips peeling back to reveal sharp teeth, her body angled protectively in front of Claire. The sound was low and guttural, carrying both warning and promise. Jonah's smirk faltered just a fraction. "Still got fight in you, huh?" he muttered. Claire kept her gun trained on him. "Turn around and get back in your truck. This is your one chance." Jonah's eyes flashed with amusement. "Or what? You'll shoot me? Sheriff Danner would love the paperwork on that." He jerked his chin toward the cage. "You don't know what you're standing in the middle of, deputy. Best thing you could do for yourself is forget you ever saw this." "Not happening," Claire said flatly. The smile dropped from Jonah's face. He moved fast, faster than she expected, lunging sideways toward the snow. Claire fired a warning shot that whistled past his leg, but Jonah had already thrown himself behind the truck door. The engine roared, the tires spinning as the vehicle lurched forward, snow spraying like shrapnel. "Move!" Claire shouted, yanking Raven by the rope. They darted toward the tree line as the truck barreled through the clearing, swerving sharply. Branches whipped against Claire's face as she sprinted into the woods, Raven bounding beside her despite her exhaustion. The sound of the truck's engine echoed through the forest, headlights slicing through gaps in the trees. Claire ducked low behind a fallen log, her breath ragged. She tightened her grip on Raven, trying to calm her shaking body. The shepherd growled, eyes fixed on the glow of headlights that swept back and forth like hunting beams. Jonah's voice carried faintly. "Come on out, deputy, you can't hide forever." Every instinct told her to stay down, but Raven jerked suddenly, pulling hard against the rope. Her body was tense, her eyes locked on something deeper in the woods. Claire hissed, "No, stay quiet." But Raven refused, tugging harder, her growl rising. Then it happened. Jonah's truck smashed through the underbrush, barely missing the log they hid behind. Claire dove sideways, dragging Raven with her. They scrambled through the snow, the world a blur of light and noise. Jonah cursed, the truck skidding to a halt before reversing, the engine revving. Claire's lungs burned as she pushed forward, heart hammering. They stumbled into another clearing where the snow was churned with old tracks. Dog prints, dozens of them, leading away into the dark. Raven barked sharply, the sound cutting like a beacon. Claire spun, pressing her back to a tree. She realized what Raven had been trying to tell her, the dogs. She knew where they had been driven. Jonah's truck burst into the clearing, headlights blinding. Claire raised her weapon again, but before she could fire, Raven lunged forward, placing herself between Claire and the truck. Her teeth snapped in the beam of the lights, her body low but defiant, a war cry in canine form. Jonah cursed again, slamming the brakes. For a heartbeat, everything froze, the truck idling, Raven snarling, Claire standing with her weapon aimed dead center at Jonah's chest through the windshield. Finally, Jonah laughed, a harsh, humorless sound, and threw the truck into reverse. Snow sprayed as he backed away, disappearing into the trees with the roar of the engine fading. He wasn't retreating out of fear, Claire knew. He was biding his time. The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire lowered her weapon slowly, her hands shaking. Raven turned back to her, ears pinned, breath ragged. Claire crouched, pulling the shepherd close, her voice hoarse. "You saved us. Again." She glanced down at the prints in the snow, the proof that Raven hadn't just been guiding her blindly. The dogs were out there, somewhere, driven into the woods or hidden in another holding pen. Raven knew it. Claire did too. The confrontation had left no illusions. This wasn't just about saving one dog. Raven was a key, a witness with 4 legs and amber eyes to something far larger and darker. Claire looked back toward the path Jonah had taken, her jaw set. The shadow had revealed itself tonight, and she knew it would return. But now she also knew where to look. The snow had hardened overnight, its crust glinting beneath a pale sun that broke timidly through the clouds. Silver Creek looked deceptively serene that morning, its church steeple gleaming under a fresh coat of ice, smoke curling gently from chimneys. But the calm belied the tension rippling under the town's surface. Deputy Claire Sheridan sat in the cramped briefing room of the sheriff's substation, her jaw clenched, the files and photographs she had gathered spread across the table like cards laid for a hand of fate. She had reached a turning point. No longer could she treat Raven's ordeal as an isolated cruelty. There was a system behind it, one that stretched across counties, maybe states, and Jonah Pike's face, scarred and smug in her memory, made it personal. Sheriff Hank Larson leaned heavily against the table, scanning the evidence with his steel-gray eyes. He was in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with salt-and-pepper hair cropped close and deep lines across his weathered face. A former Marine before he took the badge, Hank carried himself with a discipline that inspired quiet authority. He had a reputation as a man of patience and principle, but years in uniform had also left him wary, slow to commit unless the path forward was clear. His voice was gravelly but steady. "This isn't just cruelty. This is trafficking. We've had whispers for months, but nothing concrete. What you've brought back changes things, Sheridan." Across from him sat Dr. Naomi Fletcher, her glasses perched low on her nose as she jotted notes in her ledger. The veterinarian looked weary but resolute, her long days spent tending not just to Raven and her pups, but also to the neglected livestock and stray animals of the county. Naomi had once lost a child in a house fire years ago, something Claire knew from town whispers but never dared bring up. That loss had carved a quiet determination into her character, one that made her relentless in saving lives, no matter how small. Now she looked up, her hazel eyes glinting. "We can't wait for red tape. If Boone and his men are moving animals across state lines, they'll vanish before federal help arrives." Claire's hands tightened on the photos of the rusted cage, the paw prints, the truck without plates. "Raven knows where the others are. Last night she led me straight into their trail. She won't stop until we follow." She glanced toward the kennel in the corner of the room where Raven lay with her 2 pups nestled against her side. The shepherd's amber eyes watched Claire intently, as if she understood every word. Sheriff Larson rubbed his jaw. "We'll need to move carefully. That ranch on the North Ridge, abandoned years ago after the Whitakers lost it in foreclosure. People have seen trucks heading there late at night. Fits with what you're describing." Claire leaned forward. "Then that's our target." It didn't take long to form a plan. Hank would bring 2 deputies to cover the perimeter. Naomi insisted on coming despite Claire's protests. She packed her worn leather satchel with sedatives, antiseptics, and portable IV kits tools to stabilize whatever animals they found. Claire loaded her sidearm, checked her flashlight, and packed spare batteries. The memory of her brother's folded flag pressed against her ribs, urging her forward. By dusk, the team set out. The drive to the North Ridge was silent, the snow-muted forest pressing close on either side of the road. Raven sat upright in the back seat of Claire's truck, her body tense, her eyes fixed ahead as though guiding them. When they finally cut their lights and approached on foot, the ranch appeared like a ghost from the trees. Weather-beaten barns sagging under snow, the farmhouse windowless, fences broken. Yet faint tracks cut through the snow around the structures, tire ruts leading to a corrugated metal shed at the rear of the property. Sheriff Larson signaled for silence, his hand raised. The group split, deputies flanking wide, Larson toward the farmhouse, while Claire, Naomi, and Raven crept toward the shed. Claire's breath hung in the freezing air as she tested the door. It gave slightly, hinges groaning. She slipped inside. The smell hit her first urine, feces, rot, and fear, cloying and heavy. Her flashlight beam swept across rows of makeshift pens, each holding a German Shepherd or Belgian Malinois. Dozens of dogs stared back at her, their ribs visible, their eyes glassy but alive. Collars cut into their necks, some bearing faint scars of prior service tags. Claire's chest tightened. These were not just animals, they were soldiers, stolen from their handlers, abandoned by the very system that trained them. Naomi moved quickly, already assessing. They're dehydrated, malnourished, some won't last another week. She pulled vials and syringes from her bag, her hands steady. Raven padded between the pens, barking low, her tail stiff. Some of the caged dogs responded with faint whines, ears twitching as if recognizing a leader's return. Claire snapped photographs, each click echoing off the tin walls. But before she could take another, a rough voice cut through the darkness. "Well, ain't this a family reunion?" The hairs rose on the back of her neck. She spun, her flashlight beam landing on Jonah Pike as he stepped from the shadows near the doorway. His knife glinted in his hand, his smile thin and venomous. Two other men loomed behind him, burly, their faces hidden beneath ski masks. Claire raised her weapon. "Step back, Pike," Jonah chuckled. "You've got guts, deputy, but guts won't keep you alive." With a sudden lunge, one of his men slammed into her side, knocking the gun free. Claire hit the ground hard, the breath leaving her chest. Rough hands pinned her arms, binding them with coarse rope. Naomi cried out, only to be shoved aside, her bag spilling syringes across the floor. Jonah crouched in front of Claire, his scar twisting as he grinned. "You've been poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Boone doesn't like nosy cops. Shame, really, you could have walked away." He pressed the knife's edge against her cheek, just enough for the cold steel to bite. "But now you're just another problem to erase." Raven snarled from across the shed, teeth bared, body rigid. Jonah's eyes flicked toward her. "And you, stubborn mutt, should have stayed buried." Claire struggled against the ropes, fury burning through her veins. "You won't get away with this," she hissed. Jonah's smirk widened. "Funny. Your brother said the same thing." The words struck like a blow. Claire's heart froze, her mind flashing to Michael, the explosion, the unanswered questions. Jonah leaned closer, his breath sour. "Yeah, I was there. Watched him go up with the flames. He screamed your name before the fire took him." The world tilted. Rage and grief surged through Claire, blinding. Jonah rose, raising his knife. "No witnesses," he muttered. And then Raven moved. The shepherd, still weakened from birth, launched herself forward with a ferocity that defied her condition. She clamped down on the rope binding Claire's wrists, tearing and biting until the coarse fibers snapped. Claire rolled free just as Jonah's blade slashed down. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a length of pipe from the floor, swinging it with all her strength. The impact cracked against Jonah's forearm, sending the knife skittering. Naomi rushed to help, snatching up a syringe and plunging it into the thigh of one masked thug. He howled, collapsing as the sedative coursed through his system. The other lunged at Claire, but Raven leapt, her teeth sinking into his arm until he screamed and staggered back. Jonah recovered quickly, eyes blazing with hate. He lunged again, but Claire stood her ground, pipe in hand, Raven growling at her side. For a moment, the shed held its breath. Jonah sneered. "You can run, deputy. Save yourself. Or stay and die with them." He gestured toward the rows of cages, the whimpering dogs. Claire's chest heaved. The choice stood before her, raw and brutal. Escape into the snow and live, or risk everything to free them. Her brother's memory burned in her mind. Raven's amber eyes locked on hers. And for the first time since Michael's death, Claire felt clarity. She tightened her grip on the pipe, her voice cold and unyielding. "I'm not leaving anyone behind." Jonah's grin faltered. The battle was far from over, but the choice had been made. The night had dragged on like an endless siege, but when dawn finally came, it was not quiet. The first rays of light spilled over Silver Creek Ridge, illuminating the snow-choked ranch in shades of steel and amber. The air rang with the thrum of engines, radios crackling, boots pounding frozen ground. It was no longer Claire Sheridan, Raven, and Naomi standing against Jonah Pike and his thugs. Now the weight of law had arrived. Sheriff Hank Larson stood at the perimeter, his broad frame steady against the morning wind as a convoy of unmarked SUVs slid into place along the tree line. From them poured men and women in tactical gear, FBI field agents, their rifles raised, their black jackets stenciled in yellow. The operation had grown bigger than Silver Creek now, reaching into the federal sphere, and Hank had swallowed his pride enough to call them. He didn't care who got credit so long as Boone's network was torn out by its roots. The lead agent, Special Agent Marcus Hale, strode forward. Hale was in his early 40s, tall and clean-cut, his short dark hair slicked back, his sharp blue eyes scanning every detail with a soldier's precision. He had the posture of a man who lived inside rules, shoulders square, boots polished even for snow. But there was something weary in his expression, the look of someone who had been playing whack-a-mole with traffickers for years and knew there was no permanent victory, only battles won. His voice was calm but clipped as he surveyed the ranch. "We move fast, Sheriff. Shed first, barn second, house last. Contain, extract, secure." Claire stood beside him, bruised and scraped from the fight with Jonah but unbowed, her gray eyes burning. She had barely slept, refusing to leave the dogs caged in that shed. Raven leaned against her leg, blood on her muzzle but defiant, her pups waiting safely in Naomi's care back at the substation. Claire's heart clenched as she looked at the shepherd. No words needed. She knew Raven wouldn't leave until every last dog was free. "Let's finish it," Claire said, her voice raw but steady. The assault came swiftly. Agents stormed the machine shed, bolt cutters snapping chains, shouts echoing against the tin walls. Dogs barked in confusion and hope as cages were flung open. Naomi was already inside, her coat flaring as she rushed from pen to pen, her hands gentle even in the chaos. Her face, lined with years of loss, seemed softened for the first time as she soothed each animal. Claire stayed close, rifle at the ready, Raven prowling at her side. It wasn't long before resistance came. Jonah Pike staggered out of the farmhouse, bloodied from the night before, his scarred face twisted with rage. He fired a shotgun wildly, pellets spraying snow before being tackled to the ground by two agents. He fought like a rabid wolf, cursing, spitting, but cuffs snapped around his wrists at last. Claire watched as he was dragged past her, his narrow eyes locking on hers. For the first time she saw something falter in him, fear maybe, or recognition that his time under Boone's shadow was over. "Boone'll kill you for this," Jonah spat, his voice hoarse. Claire didn't flinch. "Boone's done." And then Boone himself emerged. Elias Boone had always been described as a man who moved like oil slipping into crowds, shaking hands at fairs, smiling for cameras. Now, at 53, he carried the bulk of wealth poorly concealed under a heavy wool coat, his silver hair slicked back, his pale face smooth but his eyes icy, calculating, cold. He walked from the farmhouse porch as though this were a meeting of gentlemen, his hands raised slowly. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he called, his tone syrupy. "I'm just a rancher trying to feed my stock." Hale's voice cut back, cold steel. "On the ground, Boone." But Boone's gaze sought Claire. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth curling like a blade. "You must be Sheridan, Michael's little sister." He begged longer than most. The words struck her like the lash of a whip. For a second the world narrowed to his face, her brother's ghost twisting inside her chest. Rage threatened to consume her, but Raven pressed against her leg, grounding her. Claire leveled her rifle, her voice sharp as ice. "Kneel, now." Perhaps Boone saw in her eyes that this was not a bluff. Slowly, stiffly, he lowered himself to his knees, hands laced behind his head. Agents swarmed him, cuffing his wrists, reading him his rights as the dawn brightened into full morning. The ranch was no longer a prison, but a scene of liberation. One by one, the dogs were let out into the cold air, blinking at freedom. Some stumbled, ribs jutting, tails tucked, while others barked wildly, rediscovering their voices. Naomi moved among them like a shepherd, her satchel clinking with bottles, her voice carrying soft encouragements. Sheriff Larson organized transport, his booming commands steadying the chaos. And Claire? She walked with Raven, releasing each latch, guiding each trembling animal into the light. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The ghosts of her brother, the broken animals, the years of silence. But as each cage opened, something inside her eased. For the first time since Michael's death, she felt like she was winning. By mid-morning, the property was secured. Boone and Jonah sat cuffed in the back of separate SUVs, their empire crumbling as agents bagged files, hard drives, and ledgers from the farmhouse office. The evidence was damning. There would be no dismissal this time. When the last truck pulled away, loaded with rescued canines bound for temporary shelters, the clearing fell quiet. Snow glinted under the rising sun, and the valley seemed to exhale. Claire knelt beside Raven, brushing her fingers through the shepherd's dark fur. Raven licked her hand once, her amber eyes calm now, as if she too understood that something had shifted. Weeks later, Silver Creek gathered at the edge of town for the opening of the new rescue center. The community had rallied farmers donating land, carpenters raising walls, schoolchildren painting signs. They named it Raven's Haven, the wooden letters carved and hung above the gate. Inside stretched wide pens, warm stalls, a training yard, and medical rooms designed under Naomi's guidance. Claire stood at the gate as the ribbon was cut, her parka open against the spring thaw. Raven trotted at her side, her pups now healthy, their fur glossy under the sun. Sheriff Larson clapped her shoulder, his gruff voice softer than usual. "You did good, Sheridan. Your brother would have been proud." Claire's throat tightened, but she nodded. "We did good. All of us." The crowd cheered as the first group of rehabilitated dogs bounded into the yard, their paws kicking up grass instead of snow. Children laughed, volunteers cried openly, and Naomi smiled in a way Claire had never seen, like someone who had finally healed a wound long carried. For Claire, it was more than victory. It was belonging. She wasn't just a deputy defined by loss anymore. She was a guardian for Raven, for the pups, for every voiceless creature who needed someone to fight for them. As the sun rose higher, warming the valley, Raven lifted her head and let out a long, clear bark that echoed across Silver Creek. Other dogs answered, tails wagging, voices joining in chorus. The town listened, and for once the sound was not a cry of suffering but of triumph. Claire closed her eyes, the sound wrapping around her like sunlight. She had justice for Michael, a family in Raven and her pups, and a purpose that stretched beyond herself. The scars of the past remained, but now they were stitched with something stronger. Hope. Silver Creek had endured its storm. At last, the dawn had come. The dawn. Sometimes the battles we fight are not against storms or shadows, but against silence and indifference. Claire's journey with Raven reminds us that courage is often found in the choice to protect those who cannot speak for themselves. In our daily lives, we may not all be deputies or stand face to face with danger, but each of us has the power to bring light into dark places, whether by standing up for what is right, by offering kindness to the vulnerable, or by simply refusing to turn away. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories like this one. And if you believe that hope, justice, and compassion still have a place in this world, write amen in the comments below. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may every storm in your life give way to dawn.